Well, we're going to try this again and see if I can avoid my allergies causing me to screw up. So, when I watched the video for Runeforged Hammer by DukeSloth, I thought overall he was saying some pretty good stuff, especially about Shifter Shield being the benefits. I've tried it myself in real games and found it to be very good. And like him, I've been trying to find Runeforged Hammer builds that work better than most will. And what he showed definitely seemed to be good. So I decided to put it into my simulator here to find out how good it really was, and see what it came out with. Now, as you can see, how much it actually costs, how much its DPS really was. And as a note here for people, yes, my numbers aren't exactly the same as his. There's a very specific reason why, though. If you'll notice, this armor number is not going to be the exact same as Ra's is. And that's just because of a quirk of how this is set up. I can't get those exact god numbers in. I'll call that my fault, and you'd be right. It's a quirk of how this is set up and programmed in, so that's my doing. But if you'll notice, it's only just a little bit off. It's like less than 1%, so it's close enough that what I'm going to say is 100% accurate here. Well, I can't say 100% accurate, but so close that it's going to be true. But anyways, this looked good. I ran the numbers through, and the DPS is not bad, and the cost isn't that high. So, I decided to go looking over it even more. Quick note before I continue on. Ignore these numbers through here. Yeah, I know that's Cornelius's numbers. I haven't put in Hoyi's numbers yet. And it just carries over the previous god's numbers that I looked at. And yeah, it's just me being lazy and not finished putting in everyone's metrics yet. It's boring. And someday I'll get this all finished up, and then I'll probably actually release this out into the public. Anyways, after I went looking at this, I decided to look at the other build he had put in to see how it compared. I'm overly curious, so doing something like this to me is second nature. I only missed this last one. What was it? Alright. Well, I like that. It was a little cheaper. The increase to damage per hit and Kin's damage was basically the same as his. Kin's damage shows that, yeah, this has a lot more penetration. And that's pretty much expected with the items he had picked up. But there's a much larger increase in the DPS. And to me, that was a red flag. And shows the problem I have with a lot of DukeSloth's videos. He'll look at something, but he'll usually leave something important out. And this one really showed it off. What he left out when he was explaining this was attack speed, and it's very important. The reason why it's important is your DPS, which is important for when you're trying to drop a god as a hunter, is because your DPS is how fast you can get off your attacks, and it's your damage per hit times your attack speed. It's even more important for Kins, since you can't crit with Kins. So, this attack speed is almost 20% higher than your other one, or his other builds, which is pretty much what the DPS increase is. So yeah, the other one you may get a lot more, or may not have as much sustain, since you don't have shift or shield, but you get a lot more DPS. But much more important, and possibly, especially if you're clearing lanes with your auto attacks, is you also get lifesteal from this one. So I'm actually kind of questioning if what he was saying, comparing the two, covered all the facets needed to say which build was good and which one wasn't. I'm definitely scratching my head over it, especially since this one was cheaper than the other one. Not saying one is good or bad here, but I'm definitely saying I do question if he was covering everything he needed to say if Runeforged is good or bad. Especially since there's something that he could have done to make for a much stronger build. Now, what I'm going to say here is something that even I'm still trying to get to work really well. Let's take a look at it like this. Poison Star does supply a slow. To give you an idea, take a look at the DPS. You're currently doing 236. If I apply Runeforged Hammer now, it jumps up a lot more than it should. You might be saying, oh, but it's jumping up almost 100. Runeforged Hammer, at the absolute best, if you had 100% crit, would only add on 80. But if you look, it's jumping up about 90 DPS. That's more than it should. So, yeah. With Poison Star, even with just those two, across many hits, I mean, this is doing about 300 attacks per second, you would actually do a lot. This would not be a good idea in an actual game, though, because your crit's so low, and I actually have tried this. You would want to get another crit item like that, because it cranks your crit up really high. But then you leave yourself with the sustain problem. Yeah, you're going to take down enemies really fast, but it's not necessarily going to do much. I mean, you're going to have to take something like Bloodforge, which is going to make for a really expensive build. But you're also going to do a lot of DPS. You're actually going to have some decent sustain. But I'm not saying it's necessarily a good idea. I mean, you can go over to Cupid to get more sustain if you wanted, and with his Flutter, you're going to do even more DPS. But I'm not going to say it's a great idea. I mean, you have no penetration then. You go, especially with him, you then go for Executioner, and get even more DPS since you actually have penetration then. But yeah, yes, you can get a crit-based Runeforged build to work. Just you're going to have to do it on a god-by-god basis. But everything I've done using this with Frostbound has had a big weakness to it, and that weakness is that Frostbound is actually fairly weak. The only upside to it is a guaranteed slow. Well, anyways, as I've already said in the intro to this on Reddit, feel free to drag me over the coals for saying DukeSloth is not saying enough. Or if you got questions, feel free to ask them. But I'm going to stop this here before I sniffle, since I can feel one coming on from the allergies. But feel free to ask any questions.